Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, wait, I'm the chairman now. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. In Arizona, the state of America's border is not a new crisis. The border has been broken for generations. In fact, for my entire life, the border has been a disaster. The administration's decision to suspend Title 42 will add incredible stress to federal law enforcement, nonprofits, and Arizona communities that are at capacity and have been in a state of emergency for years. I have grave concerns that DHS does not currently have the capacity to respond to the influx of migrants expected to follow the suspension of Title 42 and will not be able to ensure the safety of Arizona communities and the fair and humane treatment of migrants. In order to protect Arizona communities and ensure a fair and humane process for migrants, DHS will need to put additional resources, including staffing, transportation, physical infrastructure, and support for local communities on the ground before lifting Title 42. Now, Title 42 is not and should not be a permanent solution, but chaos in Arizona communities and threats to migrant safety are not viable alternatives. Every time migration surges, Arizona communities pay the price for the federal government's failure. Our communities, our NGOs, and our local and federal law enforcement officers have been struggling to keep up with the flow of migrants for years. While the Migration Contingency Plan discusses the planned response, I'm concerned about on-the-ground implementation. Today, Border Patrol processing centers all across the border are full. Tucson sector is taking, on average, hundreds of migrants per day from the Yuma sector to decompress their overcrowded facility. While the contingency plan does discuss surging infrastructure, transportation, and human capital to affected areas, I'm concerned that these resources will not be in place in time. So, Secretary, how will DHS ensure these resources are on the ground before Title 42 ends in order to minimize the impact on Arizona's border communities?
Senator Sinema, thank you so much, and we have spoken about this, you and I, previously. So we are already well underway in implementing the plan. It is not a plan that we are waiting to execute until May 23rd, the announced date of the end of Title 42, as the CDC has made clear. We are already surging personnel, resources, transportation resources to the border. We understand the need to be already in place when Title 42 comes to an end. So that work is well underway and has been well underway. And in fact, I set up the Southern Border Coordinating Center to bring together all of the elements of the Department of Homeland Security and to lead the interagency effort in surging resources to meet the very need and challenge that you identify. And so we are, for example, obtaining transportation resources from departments and agencies outside of the Department of Homeland Security to meet the need.
Thank you. Arizona continues to pay the price of Washington's failures on the border. Our communities right now are absorbing costs related to the migrant surge, including sanitation, emergency services for migrants in distress, hospital visits, and other costs. Many of these costs are not reimbursed by the federal government, even though this is the federal government's problem. For example, a small town in southern Arizona, Somerton, has spent tens of thousands of dollars to respond to emergency calls on the border in recent months. There's no expectation of reimbursement by the federal government for the cost to Somerton. So what additional authorities does DHS require in order to reimburse these community and their local services who are paying the price for Washington's immigration problems?
Senator, when you mention Washington's problems, I can't help but think of the need for legislation to address what is clearly a broken immigration system. We, of course, have been using the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, of which you are very familiar. We are looking at other resource vehicles to assist state and local communities that are taxed by the challenges that we are facing now. We are looking very intensely at that.
Title 42 has almost entirely suspended migrant processing at ports of entry over the last 2 years, which forces most migrants seeking asylum to enter between the ports of entry. As you know, this is dangerous for migrants, and it requires Border Patrol agents to spend a very significant amount of their time processing migrants instead of their principal job, which is to keep the border secure. So an end to Title 42 will mean increased migrant processing at ports of entry, but many of our ports of entry do not currently have the necessary staffing or infrastructure to process those high numbers of migrants while continuing to facilitate trade and travel. So what specific additional resources is DHS putting in place at the ports of entry to ensure they can continue to facilitate trade and legitimate travel and keep our community safe while also treating migrants humanely and fairly?
Senator Sinema, we are very intensely focused on both the use of technology, of course maximizing our tremendous personnel, but also bringing greater process efficiencies to facilitate lawful trade and travel at the ports of entry. I should say we are also looking at expanding the capacity at ports of entry to process individuals who are seeking relief under the laws of the United States, so they do not, so we do not encounter them in between the ports of entry. We have a virtual platform that we use called CBP One that allows individuals south of our border to register on that virtual platform. We work with international organizations and non-governmental organizations to the south of our border in Mexico. They make their claims, they are screened, and if in fact they pass that screening, we are able to bring them to a port of entry at a pre-designated time in an orderly way, and thereby avoid the encounter and the attempted illegal entry between the ports of entry. There are many details that are involved in how we are maximizing the capabilities and potential of the ports of entry, both for lawful trade and travel and to process individuals in a safe and orderly way. And I very much look forward to speaking with you further on this subject.
Arizona ports of entry process billions of dollars worth of produce and other goods each year, and that generates revenue for the federal government and, of course, boosts Arizona's economy. So what steps will the DHS take to monitor the effect of increased migrant processing at our ports of entry and to ensure that any issues are dealt with quickly to prevent disruptions to commercial trade?
So we are very focused, as I mentioned, Senator, on the ports of entry and facilitating lawful trade and travel through them. We have agriculture inspectors at the ports of entry and the Office of Field Operations within U.S. Customs and Border Protection to do that extraordinarily difficult and time-consuming work. We're always looking at how we can bring digitization to bear and how we can harness innovation and technology to drive greater efficiency and speed without compromising critical security vetting.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'd like to follow up on each of those issues and still continue to have grave concerns around the ability to implement the end of Title 42 in an effective way that protects Arizona communities. The committee will now proceed to a second round of questions. As Chairman Peters noted, this will be a 5-minute round, and we're asking senators to please keep their questions and responses to those 5 minutes. Senator Portman, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your patience with us today. There's so many important issues. One is these 42 individuals who were found recently to have come in